For more than a decade, every time I visit Los Angeles, I make a special trip to the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Hollywood, huh?
This is where magic happens. And I'm talking about the creative work that goes into making our movie-going experience touch the deepest part of our being, our emotions. As an industry, film music is part of that magic, when your vision and hearing work together to make sense of a story on screen. Hello, welcome to the podcast series Music to Our Eyes, the business of film music. I'm your host, Rosie Wong. This is the second episode of the series where we will explore what types of business considerations industry professionals have as they make this magic happen.
It's art meets commerce.
To put it simply, film music is based on the use of music to serve a moving image. However, the industry is a business, and central to a business is budget.
It's complicated because you have to have things running all at the same time. It's like, which is first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah. Like, you have a budget to work with. You have to have a composer that's going to work within that budget. You're going to have source music that's going to work within that budget. But you always also want to start with what's creatively going to serve the project, and then sort of how are we going to back that into that budget. Sometimes we go into a project and we know we have a juicy budget. We have a healthy amount of money to work with for a composer, for maybe doing live orchestra, even having live instruments. Or sometimes you go into a project and you're already starting with your ankles tied together and your hands wrapped behind your back going, how are we going to win the race? Because we have no money. But you find creative ways.
Janet Rich started her career as a music manager and moved into film music when her clients got opportunities in film composition. Today, as a music supervisor, she finds a selection of music that would work with her project. There are times she must gracefully get her point across.
When the director wanted some name brand people, we didn't have the budget for it. And I said, I really think you should take a meeting with this guy who I'm recommending. I think he could really nail it, and I know he'll do it for the budget. That's really what's going to make the decision here, because the people you want, there's not going to be extra money. We know what we have budget-wise, and I know I could deliver someone who could do the work. So I had to sort of push the director into that, and that one went really, really well.
Under the budget umbrella, there are more nuances that apply across the board.
Sometimes there's different budgets. There's an overall music budget, but it really just depends on what your negotiation is or what your agreement is before you start.
Brianna Cash is a singer-songwriter, music producer, and a music supervisor.
Sometimes if you're writing for spec, you don't always get an upfront. You don't always even get a payment unless the song is actually used or placed in the film. So every project, every situation is kind of a case-by-case basis. Whereas if you are a music supervisor, your contract will specify what amount you're going to get for that project, whether it's per episode, a series like that season, or for the film. Whatever the project may be, it varies. And again, that all depends on the budget. So I think each role, whether you're producer, songwriter, or music supervisor, is handled differently upon the project and their budget.
Music clearance consultant Mary Jo Braun offers more insight to help better understand the film music budget.
A film budget does not necessarily reflect a music budget. You may have a very big film. For instance, you may have Mission Impossible. Let's just go with that one. So you may have Mission Impossible, and Mission Impossible traditionally does not license a lot of third-party songs. The film budget may be astronomical or a very high budget, but most of that budget goes for sound effects, for stunts, for actors. So the music budget on those typically are not even a 16th of what the overall film budget looks like. It'll never match up, ever. Now, the marketing on that film may have a higher music budget because that's our best sound piece. Go see the movie. So you want to spend money on marketing. So the music marketing budget will be higher than the film music budget for third-party music.
In the music supervision and clearance world, budget affects what songs you can use. Similarly, for music composers and songwriters like Elaine Muddiman, budget affects the way she creates.
Ideally, you want to get yourself a team around you and other creative people, musicians that you want to use on a project. That's kind of another thing that's really changed in it over the last sort of 20, 40 years. Whereas people used to have engineers and producers and all kinds of people as part of the process, more and more people have ended up having to try and do as much of it as possible because the budgets are so low that suddenly they're the editor, they're the engineer, they're the singer, they're the guitar, they're the everything. That's a kind of a sad situation as well. It's become a very lonely life in comparison to how things were in the past when you had this collaboration of people. So unless you're really on the top end, where you are working with, assistant composers and, you have a vast array of musicians that you can work with, many people end up doing, working alone and trying to simulate instruments that, through libraries of samples. I mean, that's the joy of writing music, is to have it performed by real people with blood in their veins, and real instruments, that's resonating and moving air in a room, and symbiotically everybody's feeding off each other, and the sum of the parts is, exponentially greater than each individual. And that's the magic of music, is to be in a room with an orchestra or with a group of musicians playing music. It's just magical.
But sometimes Muddiman would have to go on a different path.
If you have no budget for real people, you're left with writing in the box, as we say, and then you have to get the samples to sound good. There are certain ways of writing for samples that are going to sound better than others. Whereas if you had real people with blood in the veins playing real instruments, there's huge amounts of freedom in that, which is very liberating. So budget is always the first constraint. And if you have limitless budget, then the next thing is, what are the parameters with which, what is your palette going to consist of? If you have any limitations on maybe your orchestra, if you're using an orchestra, what are the instruments that are going to be in your orchestra? Sometimes you can add things here and there for certain cues that aren't going to be in the rest of the film, and that's fine too. And that's liberating because you have no constraints. And in some ways it can be inhibiting because you go, oh my God, I can think of anything, and now I can't think of anything. And having a little box that you're in that you're restricted to can have its own liberation in that it stops you overthinking things, because I can't do it with this, that and the other. I've only got to stay with these 5 instruments. And so then you get creative in a different way. I think it's a question of playing to the strengths of each situation and trying to make the best of every bad job, so to speak, every limitation that you have, make it into an advantage.
Turning every limitation into an advantage, like she did for a 2009 film score. She was nominated for the World Soundtrack Award and Hollywood Music and Media Awards.
One of the things I really enjoyed was when I worked on Skin, and I didn't have the budget to go around the world to work with the people I wanted to use on the project. So it was a question of working via the internet, sending them pieces of music and having them record them in their own studio. Like, I worked with the wonderful Miriam Stockley, and she sang the songs and sent me the recording back. Much as I would have loved to have been there during the recording, I mean, it was still a wonderful thing to experience, just having her voice coming out of the speakers to me the following day. It was a real thrill. And, working with a black orchestra in South Africa, all these wonderful young musicians who played for me in a studio in South Africa. I couldn't go there, but I was getting the recording through the internet. Those experiences were not ideal, but we had to do what we had to do to make it happen,
One expense that Muddiman cites as a personal requirement is her use of an agent. who can negotiate a better deal for those they represent. She says artists oftentimes have trouble advocating for themselves because they love what they do, and that can place them in a disadvantageous position.
Because it's always very embarrassing talking about money with someone that you're trying to be creative with. So it can help to have an agent to be that sort of separation. I think composers generally are notorious, and artistic people are kind of notorious for being terrible at advocating for themselves, which is the struggling artist sort of perception. Agents do carry a lot of weight in this industry because of it. It's necessary.
And one key element working with an agent is to establish trust.
That's the important thing on both sides. The agent can trust you to do a good job and to get the job done on time, and within budget. And your agent can negotiate you something decent so that you can afford to do the job on time and in budget,
Madiman says the situation that led to artists needing such help is quite concerning.
They didn't necessarily understand the value of their work.
Which leads to a bigger issue.
I feel a lot of the young composers who are basically being asked to work for free. Just because someone has a job that they enjoy doing, it doesn't mean to say you should get them to do it for free.
Unlike many other talents in the entertainment industries, film music composers currently do not have a union that can protect them.
We're not allowed to unionize. These are man-made rules. As Cesar Chavez would say about the farmers' union when they didn't let the farmers unionize. Man-made laws can be changed by man, mankind when I say man. But it has been an issue for the last, 60-odd years that when the SDL was established, it was primarily established to try and help advocate for composers to sustain their level of income with the studios. There's been a couple of occasions where we've tried to unionize in some form or another. We haven't succeeded for various reasons. That is an interesting subject. It's a bit like saying, is the minimum wage going to affect the workforce? Will it stop people being able to charge more? Because in some ways it's bringing up the lower part of it, but is it capping the upper level? I don't necessarily think that would be the case. I think someone like John Powell, John Williams, all these big composers would not be affected by a minimum wage because they just wouldn't do it for that.
But young and rising composers probably would be, Madiman says.
By all means, give them a chance, but why shouldn't they be paid? And why have we got into a situation where there's no money for composers? They pay the caterers, they pay the actors often. But the musicians often get the rough end of the wedge. There's nothing left by the time it gets to the composer. And that's become a norm and almost an acceptable norm. And to me, it's not fair at all. I felt for many years that a lot of the arguments that people use as to why musicians should work for free hold true for actors too. But yet the actors have managed to carve out some decent norm for their pay and an acceptable or unacceptable things. They're not going to allow their acting community to be taken advantage of in that way. And so there are some minimums that are set and some precedents. And for some reason, the musicians haven't managed to get their act together to form a similar alliance. The argument is the same. Well, everybody wants to write music for film. Well, yeah, everyone wants to be an actor as well, They're fun jobs to do. So I don't hold that argument up as a reason why, because many jobs people enjoy doing. If you have a product like a film and you're paying everybody but the musicians, how is that fair?
Now, let's step back for a moment. Think about the most recent time you watched a film. Did any music or background score in any particular film stand out to you? Or do you recall any of it at all? I want to share this with you. Scholar from University of Warsaw, Agnieszka Cieślak, wrote that we go to see a movie or watch a film, but what we really do is watch and listen simultaneously. There are scholars who study human psychology in relation to film music and explain such sensory bias. Like Marilyn Boltz and Annabelle Cohen, scholars recognize that humans tend to pay more attention to what they see than what they hear. This can be explained by the phenomenon called visual dominance. However, even if film music functions below our consciousness, that does not make it less valuable. In fact, it is because of that almost undetectable power over us that makes our film watching experience enjoyable. As Professor Catherine Kalanick wrote in her book from 2023, quote, "Music was rendered unobtrusive by masking its entrances and exits," unquote. Without music, our experience would be vastly different. And without music composers, film as a production would be different too.
People could argue that it's half of the thing is a sound. It's become a norm, which is really, really sad. That people say, well, it's going to give you exposure, and practice. And we say, well, we're dying of exposure. It doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't put food on the table. Many people have tried to take a stand to try and prevent it. But I think we do have to have some kind of union, and we do have to learn from the acting community as to how they've managed to. And, we have AI coming along, which is weakening all of our cases, and that's a big pressure on all of our creative communities. If you have an artificial intelligence that is basically a big hopper for every kind of talent that, and creative talent in the world, and you're just going to put it in the hopper and churn out stuff based on what's gone before, then we're all out of a job. And that's not a good thing for society. Artificial intelligence can, if it's used in a way as it's been done, been used in the past, where you're using computers to help you create things, hopefully one creates better things rather than just quicker things and more things that are not that good. The idea is that you can use tools to increase the quality, not just the quantity.
Topics like budget and compensation can be tough, but in this business, they are necessary in conversations. Thank you for tuning in. We'll explore some other business factors in film music when we come back. Money is a resource. It can dictate how far you can go with your vision and how tied up you are with your assets. Here's another reality factor in these professionals' decision-making: time.
There's the old adage that you've got three elements. If something is either good, or it's cheap, or it's fast, but you can't have all three.
Blunt, but straight to the point.
You can have two of the three. If you want it to be good, it has to be either have lots of time or lots of money. If you are lacking in one of those elements, either time, money, or it being good, you're going to miss out on one of those. So the longer you have, the better it's going to sound. The more money you have, the better it's going to sound. It's always a good idea to invest time and money in the music, because it's a large part of a movie or a TV show or anything. The sound, not necessarily just the music even, but the sound is a major part of any movie. And I always tell young filmmakers, really take your time and spend your money on making it sound good, because the illusion of your ears and your eyes is very powerful.
Depending on the project, composers may jump in at different times.
Usually right at the very end, but that doesn't mean it's always that way. Sometimes, like with animation, often you get to work with the very early stages of the animatic, because it takes such a long time for them to finish the animation, so they can't get you in right at the end. And often, it's not going to change that much. From just the way they animate it and light it, the timing isn't going to change that much. So there's no reason necessarily to delay in getting the music composed for those scenes.
And most likely, you're still one of the last people to wrap things up.
you would have a film and it would pretty much be finished. Although often directors like to carry on editing after the locked picture, in inverted commas, and then it kind of gets unlocked until the very last minute because they're trying to obviously improve the product for as long as they have time to do, which obviously causes problems for the composers because we're trying to write to picture, and if they're cutting out frames or adding frames here and there, it plays havoc with the tempo of our piece. So that's often a challenge to try and overcome. Back in the old days, a lock picture really was a lock picture because a lot of the stuff before it was done digitally, you didn't have the opportunity to amend it. Whereas nowadays, people have, Final Cut, software on their computers, and they can edit, till the cows come home type of thing. And they literally do keep editing right up until the last minute.
Most of the time, music roles come in during post-production. This is especially true for Brianna Cash, who juggles among songwriting, music producing, and music supervision.
Your time to work or your time to start really comes at the end. I would say maybe that's when it gets the most crazy busy. That's like your busy time. But you're usually hired when the project starts or even before the project starts, but you don't really have too much to do until the end unless it really, again, depends on the project and your relationship with everyone and what is going on, what's going to be needed. Like, for an example, if it's a period piece and you have to source music from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, you may start early. You're reading the script. You need to get an idea of like what's going to be needed. So you start doing your research. And so all that stuff happens early on. And then when it comes time to the end, then you're clearing stuff. A lot of times, too, you could be doing a lot of unnecessary work for no reason because if scenes are cut, things are changed, then, you're clearing a song for something that no longer exists 6 months later. Some situations, you're starting to work early on, and in others, sometimes it's better to wait towards the end because you have a better idea of what you need to do.
The volatile nature of her work was not an exaggeration.
Where I have spent months trying to clear a specific song for something. They all said yes, and then come to find out we ended up cutting the scene, and none of that was necessary. And then towards the end, they decided on whatever deadline, and then things got moved around and everything changed, and then it was kind of like take your time but hurry up scenario, and it was a little crazy on getting other sourced music to be clearable. It is different all the time.
Especially in music clearance, you're constantly racing against time.
Most of the time it's in post that my job really gets fired up. But I would say that on occasion, I'm there helping with production. It works both ways, but mostly in post, I would say, that you do a good amount of your work because you have to clean stuff up that either didn't work, they have a change of heart, I don't like that song for that scene anymore. And then you have to clear more music. So it's never ending until it ends.
Yes, racing against time with the constraint of money. This is the reality in the production world. What's also real is the nature of a production, collaboration. You're working with human beings who also share the same passion in the work as you do. You would want to have a good relationship with them. For Janet Rich, the quality of her work and relationships becomes part of her brand as a music supervisor.
I look at the jobs I've had, and I consistently work with for over many decades the same producers, the same directors. I always feel like I know I'm doing a good job if I'm doing a second movie, a third movie, a fourth advertisement, if I'm consistently working with the same people. In the end, the director combined with the producer are the folks that it's their vision on screen. So they really need to have an excellent relationship with the composer and really trust that they picked the right person. And that goes for, making playlists of selects for songs for different source cues in a spot.
Part of facilitating teamwork is understanding how people work differently.
Also things that you wouldn't think of, like time zone. Where everybody's working ends up being really important sometimes. On some projects, I'll have the things being edited in LA, but the director's in Australia. So how are we going to work together to make sure you're hearing things in your daytime when you're in your best? You can be listening, and the composer can work in their daytime and get their best work. So, sometimes there is funny things like, the geography of this is not a match. It's not going to be conducive to a good work environment. So sometimes there's things like that come into play. There's personalities. Yeah, I guess a lot of it, you just have to use your instinct. Like, who's going to like each other? Are these guys going to get along? I have a director I work with. He's an amazing storyteller as a documentarian, but just not great with people, just not. So I always have to be like, have him come in last, in the sense that I really make sure composers or people that I want to get involved are really primed on the project first, that I really make sure they understand the story, the needs, the timeline, the calendar, the budget, know all the pieces. So the director can only just talk about the vision. They don't have to talk about any of the other stuff.
Good relationships go a long way because they are also key for future opportunities.
I needed someone, I listened to his material, and then so I worked with him on this one documentary, and then I brought him into this other bigger docu-series, and he crushed it. He did a great job. He'll get other work with this director who didn't even want to listen to another idea of a person. But I was like, listen, you have to. We don't have the budget to get the person you want. So you're going to literally have to deal. And now I feel like we made a relationship that's a strong one for a long time.
In music clearance consultant Mary Jo Braun's case, good relationships can become a silver lining when life gets a little tough.
If you know anything about Paramount and the layoffs, you need to read about it because it had nothing to do with you being liked or your job performance. I did a good job, and Paramount knows that. But, they had to meet a number, and I was part of a number, essentially. But that doesn't mean that I won't get back into that number. You have people in this industry that will always reach out to you, and that's happening, which is very nice.
Film music is an industry where artistic and business decisions are made. As you heard from Janet Rich, Brianna Cash, Mary Jo Braun, and Elaine Muddyman, on the business side of the industry, the major factors in their decision-making include budget, compensation, time, and relationships. These are often the necessary ingredients to a creative production. Thank you for listening. This episode was produced and edited by me, Rosie Wong. The music is by Clavier. Special thanks to the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism and Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University, and my committee members, Dr. Elizabeth Hendrickson, Professor Bill Clack, and Professor Josh Antonuccio. You may visit my website at rosiewongjournalism.weebly.com to explore the whole podcast series, Music to Our Eyes, the Business of Film Music. To find out more about the professionals' background and the way they strategize to make ends meet, listen to Episode 1 and Episode 3 of this series. And remember, every limitation that you have, make it into an advantage.